Well, first I'd like to thank Art Basel Hong Kong just for inviting us to speak today. It's an honor, and I'd sort of like to start off with just the question that was given to us: what are artists learning from tech and AI today? And I think we've had some discussion among the three of us, and I think maybe we would like to question the question, that the question is framing it perhaps in a different way than we might want to talk about how we're using AI. I think the way I thought would make sense to proceed here, I think talking about AI is so vast, and talking about technology in the world we live in, that the discussion could very easily digress all over the place. So just for conversation purposes, sort of dividing it into two parts. One is technology and the other is AI. And I think that's partly because I feel that AI really, a whole set of options are introduced here that really are very complex and really merits a discussion in and of itself. And then for technology, for discussion's sake, we're talking about, the 20th century. I think in a number of discussions I've had, the idea that technology is not new. We've had technology since the beginning of the species. And that's a discussion itself, but I think for today, we're going to try to talk about technology as what is developed, let's say, from the early 20th century, up until we have AI, and then we'll talk about AI. So that's just a very simple kind of structure for what we're doing. Okay, so I think I'd like to just pose to Shu Lea and Lawrence to talk about how do artists learn from technology. And I guess we should first talk a bit about our work. Sorry, I'm sort of jumping the gun here. Okay, so I'm just briefly going to talk about my work. These images are showing you, this represents 30 or 40 years of work. To be brief, my work has always been about a kind of proposing that there is some sensibility going on in the embodied technology that we are increasingly entering, and that how to visualize it. And for me, visualization was very key, very important. There are people who are writing about it or expressing it in music. But for me, it was how to visualize it. And that in itself was the challenge. And that I'm proposing that there is something that is quote unquote new. And I'm saying that in the context of the milieu that I entered in, what we call sort of postmodernism, where the new is being questioned, that there couldn't be any new anymore. And I think that the period we're entering is kind of unprecedented, and I would say that even more today, that the way we're integrating with technology is really unprecedented for the species. And that is kind of how the frame of mind that I had in doing the work. I'm not going to go into specifics of my work here. I'll maybe just talk there's one image you'll see with sort of vehicular. This is an outdoor installation on the High Line in New York. That's like this piece here. That's kind of some of my latest work where I'm referencing the car, the illusion of skin or the organic, and then I'm using some AI in terms of how to image the body. And the idea there, I grew up in the 50s with the beginning of Detroit and automobiles, so it's very deep in my personal unconscious, and that we are in cars and that we are becoming cars, if you could say that. And then the cars are becoming sentient, and then we are becoming sentient to the cars. So that's just one situation that gives you a sense of how I'm thinking. And that kind of car, body, skin, what is that as an object? And could I visualize that in some way, that sense? Okay, I think I'll stop there. Shu Lea?
Yeah, it somehow jumped into my slides, but okay. I didn't want to particularly talk about all my work, but focus on this year. I actually currently has an exhibition at Haus der Kunst in Munich called Kiss, Kiss, Kill, Kill. And I just finished a theatrical performance at the Tate Modern last weekend, March. For me, the Kiss, Kiss, Kill, Kill at Munich is supposed to be a kind of updated survey show, so kind of taking from some of my old work, and from these old work. Okay, I'm a bit diverted. Okay. So Kiss Kiss Kill Kill actually starts from here. This is the gallery view of the Haus der Kunst. And so it's an exhibition supposed to be a kind of updated survey show. So you take on some of the old project or concept of the old project and rework it and sort of through kind of combinant elements or combining different work together become a new production. So there are 3 rooms, and each room, the first room is called home delivery, the second room is called spoken word, and the third room is called portal porting. The 3 rooms actually altogether dealing with a lot of trash, maybe not landscape, but trashscape. I think it is my, speaking of technology, maybe my obsession of the kind of after technology, you got trash in whichever technology, in cooking, in food production, in the electronic use, in the car. So I got lots of trash to deal with. Of course, on the bigger terms will be if you wander through the 3 gallery space, that you got the automated robots doing cell routing. There's a revived keyboard membranes altering words, the cell portrait of my AI cell portrait, define the AI algorithm. The burn car, I also have cars in my show. The burn car is calling for revolution. And there's also the mushroom transmitting life signals. So in a way that I'm talking about technology and biosphere, and maybe this is also a topic we can discuss because I think we are always entangled in this technology and the biotechnology, or actually more like a bio, including farming and diversity, biodiversity. These few slides are actually from the theater I just did at Tate Modern. It's titled Hagay Dreaming. Officially will be my first time officially having a collaboration with Taiwanese indigenous artist and shaman Dong Dong Ho Wen. And the theater piece actually revived the sort of traditional culture, but taking the legend from the Trulu tribe and make into a kind of techno fantasia work. I would consider both the installation at the Munich and the theater piece in Tate Modern is sort of opening for me the 2025 as a technical blast. So we should be able to talk about technology and AI in a bit. Yeah.
Great. So I'll just talk briefly about the main ideas. So I think most of my work, I make installations and video games and films, but generally thinking about the experience of the wanderer or the journey through landscapes, real and imagined. I was just thinking about what Tishan was saying also in terms of the car, because my parents used to work for an airline, and so I have this very strong memory growing up in the aeroplane, basically, which is both an object that you see and that contains you and takes you on a journey to other places. In recent years, I eventually thought that led to this ongoing search for very basic questions like where am I, and later on, like, who am I, or like, what is my identity in this technological landscape? So thinking about the question of the perspective of the wanderer as well, because I think this is really tied to not just transportation technologies, but also to visual technologies. So I was born in 1982, so I saw the transition of video games and science fiction from being essentially like physical makeup and visual effects in films and two-dimensional video games, all the way to transitioning to kind of photorealism that we have in CGI and even AI-generated images today. And throughout all of this, witnessing both as a fan of all these different art forms, but also as a producer trying to use these technologies to make my own visions, I instinctively think about like what is the journey through these landscapes, as in the same way that I'm building them. So, for example, like if you're a filmmaker in let's say science fiction, very often there's a division of labor between the set design, the lighting, the cinematography, and the acting and direction. But what working with video game engines allows the artist is to kind of control and think about all of these different relationships. So, for example, when I'm building the scenography for the video game, I'm also thinking, what will be the cinematography, the journey through it in that time. So I feel that it's not just the visual technologies that I'm interested in, but what kind of stories and narratives like follow on from these. And I read a quote, I can't remember who it's by, that if you contrast like mythical stories where the kind of hero is trying to save the world, in film noir and in cyberpunk, the journey is more about trying to save yourself from the world, not because you're kind of like the hero is selfish, but because the world is so intrinsically bad that the only sensible thing, the moral thing to do is to try and save yourself first. And it reminds me of like in airplanes, they're like, put your safety mask on before you try and help others. And that's always this thing I'm thinking about, where does the ability for compassion come in the midst of all these technologies? And so in the films I make, the AI, I choose AI as the protagonist of the films because I see them as the future AI as the mirror of us. So in mainstream media and so on, very often it's like AI is doing this and that, but I feel we should consider the AI more like a child that we are teaching, as opposed to an adult who we're kind of judging and kind of using as a scapegoat for all of the things that we don't want to deal with. And the final thing I'll say is that this led to a video essay I made in 2016 called Sino-Futurism, because I was, I'm based in London, and so I think a lot about the kind of post-colonial condition and what is the role of China and Chinese diaspora in the midst of technology worldwide. So in brief, Sino-Futurism was my response to Afrofuturism. And I was shocked that there was not the same kind of discourse and conversation about China and technology in relation to ideas of like race and identity. Like there's a very rich body of work on Afrofuturism. So I thought that in a way that the AI is the ideal avatar of Sino-Futurism, because the very same things that Chinese culture and development is stereotyped with: copying, gaming, gambling, really good at maths, ability to study forever, endless capacity for work. It's exactly the same thing that AI is built upon. So I thought, why not kind of reclaim that identity, the anonymity, the lack of originality, as actually the basis of something new. So just, that's, really happy to be here and talk with Tishan and Shu Lea.
Okay. Well, you brought up a lot of issues, Lawrence. We could start from there. So a good place to go maybe here would be this question of how to reform the question. So instead of the idea of how are artists learning from tech and AI, I think it's not so much that we're trying to learn something that we're given to us and then we're trying to learn it. Lawrence and I were just briefly chatting before the talk. Both of us in our work, we sort of feel like we're sort of immersed in something and then something is happening. That's a very different understanding of the process of what's happening here. And I would add that I don't think it's just artists that are, I think everybody, the whole world, is more in this situation of not so much learning how to use these machines that are being controlled by huge corporations that are giving us this stuff, but that it feels more like we're immersed in this and we don't even know what it is, and we're trying to somehow figure out how to be in this stuff. And so maybe you might have a suggestion how we could ask it differently in terms of how artists are learning, maybe how artists are immersed, or
You immerse yourself. So.
Your fault. Yeah, you deal with it. I mean, it's interesting. I think the first thing I think is that the question, like, what do artists learn from technology? I feel in recent years as well, it's like technology, or at least the technology industry, wants to learn from artists. And that has a long, I guess, tradition in terms of like innovation as well. And I think because of this, in my opinion, like this myth of the Silicon Valley entrepreneur being a creative artist, in the Steve Jobs kind of mold. And sometimes I get asked for, commissions to do like, oh, will you do like a talk, keynote, like think tank kind of thing? And I always feel like, I don't really have anything to offer because I can just, give weird ideas. But are artists being instrumentalized in that, much more massive development of technology? And I think that's definitely true. But in terms of like what I've learned from technology, I mean, going back to this Sino-futurist question, is after dealing with the subject of like an AI protagonist for about 8 or 9 years now, it's not like I think, oh, the AI is so different. I actually start thinking, I'm actually very similar, because I think like I go through the same creative decisions. Like I am trying to say smart things on stage right now that are like measured for the audience and responding to both of you. And the things that I'm saying are based on a mental calculation of like what is gonna resonate well, what people are gonna understand. And that process is algorithmic in a certain way. It's just the way that I've been kind of trained to communicate has optimized for this kind of situation. So in brief, like it's not so much like me learning from technology, but rather me trying to empathize with those very same structures that previously I've been led to believe are actually bad things, Yeah. In terms of like saying original thoughts, I actually think, no, like I'm saying very obvious things that are kind of machine-like, even though it's filtered through my emotions. So that's one of my main learnings of working with AI, actually. It's this empathetic angle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to say, in terms of the cooperation and artist, I totally aware. In the beginning of the more like the electronic technology, at the time, I think, IBM and a lot of Japanese JVC, Panasonic, and even now we see that the Guggenheim have LG Art and Technology Award. The Tate Modern's turbine hall is run by the car company in Korea, the
Hyundai?
Hyundai, yes. And so in a way, speaking of the technology and cooperation and how cooperation actually, yes, they are learning from artists, but then artists become the best assets for the publicity. And so I'm quite aware of the situation, particularly like in the beginning when, let's say, video technology is still 20th century, right? Okay, fine. So when the first video technology got introduced, Bill Viola was given all the JVC camera to do his installation, for example. I think that was a time that we thought, Sony and all these technology would listen to us and, we could guide the direction. Of course, we got incorporated and pretty much the corporate take over and, I don't mind to get an award that's granted by LG, right? However, do I have to use all the LG computer screens or monitors? But yes, I did get sponsorship on them. So that is a kind of situation. However, if then we step into the AI technology, I think this is even more interesting situation because AI pretty much, we are feeding the AI. I mean, not speak of artists, but also the public, all of you, we all feeding the AI. We are growing this child together. If you think about, I always think about in maybe still in 2000, we have a very, in the digital media, we talk about digital commons. So we talk about Creative Commons. We talk about how artists can share your work, digital work. You're willing to share your digital work. You have, in terms of Creative Commons, dropped out by the lawyers at Harvard University, that it was clear that you can share your work by saying like you attribute your appropriation with the credit of the artist, or you just take it. Some artists say, we just open it up. You can take any work of mine, just use it, right? So basically, I think this particular days of Creative Commons actually build up this commons library or database that provide, today the AI is able to use this database. However, that speaking of the algorithm, and I also want to bring up the so-called the AI alignment in a way that there is a kind of policing with how the child is learning, right? It's like you say like, oh, we're growing this child together, we feed the child the data, and hopefully, and of course, it's not hopefully, of course the child gonna overgrow you. So right now, there's all this fear about AI gonna take over human kind of thing. I think today I read a curator actually saying like we should go back to handwriting, right? Yeah, sure. So I just thinking in terms of the direction of the database can be bigger and bigger, taking over whatever assets we have, and within this huge database that how the machine is going to be smarter and for sure take over. So what do we do? I think there's been, the Hollywood would say, stop. We cannot use AI to write a script, stop. The script writer is having a strike, right? So I think we are at a stage like thinking how to negotiate with the child we grow up. We grow, right? So.
Yeah, I've often asked, do I feel like we are entering a dystopian or utopian realm here? We seem to be leaning more towards AI in our discussion right now, maybe because that is really the active issue. But my answer is, in a way, I think when the human species emerged, I would ask, is that dystopian or was that utopian? In some ways, one could easily make an argument that even the appearance of the human species was dystopian to start out with. And so the question is, AI, is it going to replace us in some very negative way, or the AI optimists or the technological optimists would say, no, this is going to be a whole new world in a positive way. It could be both. And I don't think we've ever been in a situation where it's ever been one or the other. There's always been huge dangers. I grew up in the Cold War era where we were, preparing for nuclear war. And I think the dangers of AI are very real and very much happening. At the same time, the potential for cures and the environment and all these other issues that we're trying to figure out could be answered by AI. So I do think the issue is human agency, and to what extent, what will human agency be, and what agency do we really want? Are we willing to trade, for instance, solving the environmental issues, the environmental problems, in exchange for perhaps a reduction in human agency, in our own particular agency? So it may not be one or the other. So to go back to the question of how artists are learning from tech and AI, I would just like to say a little bit about my own experience. I started in a very analog way, working on wood and very traditional media. But I had this idea, and I sort of, people ask, why don't you work technologically, since that's what your work is about, quote unquote, embodied technology. And I felt that I didn't have the facility yet at that point, and that was before the iPhone, the computer, before the internet. I didn't have enough facility with technology at that time, which is basically filmmaking. A little bit of video art was emerging, to be able to talk about the issues in the way that I could with more traditional media, because it happened to be my training. I was just born in a particular period historically. But the argument I had was, it's not so much for me the use of technology. It was not the critical thing. I wanted to talk about what is technology doing to us, and is there a different consciousness emerging? And given the history of analog visuality, it seemed there could possibly be a way of describing that experience in something that's not technological, but that actually is addressing our interaction with technology. So the question of how are we learning from technology, totally beyond what I ever imagined when they introduced Photoshop as a first kind of digital visualization tool for artists, which is different than programmers. I was very aware of, the power that programmers had. In fact, there's an argument that the programmer is really the artist. And it's a very interesting and valid argument. But for artists in the analog way, they introduced something like Photoshop that was easy to use. And when I first learned it, I wanted to use Photoshop like it was a pencil. And if I couldn't get it to feel like a pencil, I didn't think I could work with it. In a way, I wanted it to be really dumbed down. And they had these books called Photoshop for Dummies. And I thought that was great. That's exactly the level that I wanted. And it was when that emerged, that ability to work that way, that I felt I could really invest in Photoshop. And then it happened that Photoshop, the way it was formed, the way it was designed by the programmers, just coincided with what I was trying to do in analog, but in a much faster, efficient, much more imaginative way. And so it was just by chance a merging of the technological tool with a more traditional, artistic, analog kind of mode of expression. And then that has now just it increased in the last 20 or 30 years in the work. The work really just allowed, or I should say the evolution of technology and visual tools for artists just allowed what I was trying to say about technology to unfold in a way that was much clearer and more implicit, so that now my work is technologically produced. And so it is what, the process itself is what it's about. And Wilhelm Flusser, the German philosopher, writes and predicts that might happen, and the whole transformation into an image society, a photographic society. So I look now at my situation, and I'm sort of totally shocked that I'm really in an apparatus, as Flusser would write, of the software, the cloud, the machine, the printing out, the 3D printing, and I'm just a body in this machinic object that is producing the work. And the work is about that itself as well. So it's all kind of one gestalt. Now that's just the way I happen to work and the way my work evolved. There are many, many other ways that artists are doing amazing things with technology, but my point is really it's a very organic process that's very much, I feel, dependent on the person, the particular artist, and their own sensibilities. So in a way, it's not unlike analog, handling a brush or a pencil. It really is about how you want to handle something. And I think instead of feeling, I think a lot of artists might feel intimidated by, there's a sophisticated quote unquote computer and they have to kind of learn it. It's actually more like just picking up something and then just doing something. And that's kind of my experience of it.
I just want to, something that I thought of in terms of like that ambivalence that you were saying, in terms of whether these works that we're making really can be read in either like utopian or dystopian ways. And, you know, like seeing these images flash up on screen in my peripheral vision, I can't help but seeing that possibility for so many of these works, because that dual reading of the technological image as alternately a great thing or a bad thing, and it's kind of what you do with it, is for some reason so baked into using tools, whether Photoshop or 3D video game engines or CGI or kind of performance. And that really, I think sometimes our work is described maybe in terms of like the science fiction or the horror and so on. And I was just thinking how strange it was that horror and science fiction, or horror and fantasy, are kind of like twin genres. You know, they kind of emerged at the same time. It's like what Frankenstein is both body horror and science fiction fantasy simultaneously, and like Arcadian myth. And maybe that's just for some reason, the condition of dealing with technology as a political or moral thing. It's impossible to separate those two things, the horror aspect and the fantasy aspect. And you know, for me personally, I always oscillate between these two modes, either visually and then sometimes as a scriptwriter as well. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, it's deeply troubling and horrible at the same time. And going back to what Shu Lea was saying, and you were saying as well, we're part of the apparatus, which includes the companies, the individual programmers, the list of Photoshop credits when you open the program. That's, you know, it's not long enough for you to actually read everyone. It's like the whole cast of characters, including the world that is embodied in the whole machine, it's both like sublime in terms of the scale and the change of the rate of transformation, and also troubling. And maybe going back to just working as an artist, like, because I work quite intuitively, and then when I start working and having work in galleries and biennials, I realize that I think in terms of, like a practice. I instinctively do things, but the practice has to turn into projects, which makes sense over like 5 to 10 years, and the projects boil down into individual works that have, you know, titles and a year when they were completed. But in all of these three cases, the work, the project, and the practice, they kind of intersect with the time scale of society and technology in different ways. And I feel, for me, like I just hope that over the long term, the individual works and projects make sense somehow. And that's not really up to me, I feel,
Yeah.
Oh, we answering the question? Oh, okay. So how do I get into technology? Actually, I'm penis envy. In a way, like, you know, I just really want to have that access to the technology that white men invented. So right from the beginning, my way of getting access to technology has been in a certain way. I steal, I borrow, and I hack. And I think until now, I'm still at that level. I don't really own any technology, and that's why any kind of updated technology for me is to take it, to use it, and to abandon it. That's why I got so much trash to deal with. So it's really in that process. I have, through different period or different cycle of my work, I call myself a digital nomad. I call myself a high-tech aborigine. What else I call myself? I actually call myself badass because I admit it. Okay, I admit it because too much people want to label me, so I just did it. Yeah, I think there's been so much myth and kind of conception about technology or AI, and the way that we feel like we should conquer it, or we should worry about. It's a bit like if you look at a lot of science fiction film, a big science fiction fear is always be about alien, the clone baby, the AI, whichever, that would take over human beings. So that's like actually a very constant fear that embedded in our conception of the technology, human and technology. I do want to answer about utopia and dystopia also, because over years, almost every work I do, then I always get a question from the audience. Is it dystopia or utopia? I hope you don't ask me this question today. We don't have time for that. Anyway, so I finally came out with one answer, that I think my work is utopia, because I want to advocate resistance. And as far as there is resistance, then it's utopia. So I separate myself from being dystopia.
Okay, so I'd like to move into AI a little bit more. I think AI opens up a whole nother set of questions. And that, for me, this whole question of what is human, what is the human, as AI is beginning to really enter the cognitive aspect, I think that for me, the experience of AI, in the very limited way that I've experienced, is that it is really a cognitive a jump, in that I can't cognitively really comprehend it. I can't comprehend the implications. I can't comprehend where it's going. I can use it as a tool within the small world that I use in visualization, but I'm aware that AI is penetrating everything in the world we're living in. And we're really at the beginning, and we don't really yet know how this is all going to manifest in a much more emphatic way. And I think that's partly the fear, and it may be very real. So I'd like to just throw out this idea of, well, for instance, when we talked at the beginning about just the question of how we're learning tech, and maybe we're not really learning tech, we're just floundering in tech. It has occurred to me that we may have to think of ourselves differently, not only in terms of our bodies, but in terms of what we are as humans, to really perhaps understand how to deal with AI as the next kind of jump in quote-unquote technology. And I'd kind of like to just throw that out, if there are thoughts on that.
So maybe growing up in the 80s and 90s, right? I feel that a lot of this science fiction, the things that are kind of promised in the media as well, you had virtual reality, which would be, I guess, the space of technology. You would have AI, which is the generally threatening aspect of self-conscious technology, or at least the robot fighting back in a kind of immaterial form, and the internet. You know, those were the three kind of big channels, at least, that I was exposed to. I feel internet is more, I'm not going to talk about that because I feel that's more the communication, the medium, but the AI is like the personality of technology in a way, and virtual reality is like the space of it. So in that personality of technology, what's really interesting in recent years, and in a sense like unanticipated, is that for me the linguistic aspect of AI, ChatGPT and LLMs and all of that, has kind of taken center stage rather than the visual aspect. Of course, we have image generation and so on, but for some reason it is the reasoning ability, the linguistic text-based communication possibilities of AI that have, to be honest, also threatened the most people, from the writer strike in Hollywood and so on, and to high school people like generating their essays. Not that anyone does that. So, but it also made me go back to the beginning, and it's just so counterintuitive in that since the genesis of, Alan Turing's imitation game, the Turing test, ELIZA in the 1970s, this idea of conversation has progressed in parallel with a much, much bigger societal shift from manufacturing in terms of labor to knowledge work. And maybe if you look in 100 years ago, in the 20th century, you look at Metropolis and cinematic fears of the robot, that would be, the robot worker replacing the human one, and then now it's the knowledge AI replacing the human knowledge worker. I feel the generalized fear or anxiety is nobody is safe. Previously, you could find refuge to some higher specialization. Oh, I'm gonna be a really specialized dentist. They're never, automation will never touch me in that highly specialized. I'm a therapist and a dentist. I'm gonna be fine. But I feel in every dimension, the anxiety grows and pervades. And that's really an aspect I deal with in my work. I have self-driving cars that are depressed because they feel there's so much more. And actually, the next slide shows a self-driving car undergoing equine therapy, which is what humans go and ride horses to feel better when the drugs don't work for antidepressant and so on. I thought maybe the self-driving car would see an antiquated technology, the horse, and the horse was useful in the Industrial Revolution for transport and for farm labor, useful until they were no longer useful, and then they became glue and shoes and, bones and meat. And in a sense, that generalized anxiety is not even unique to humans, but I thought it being a universal thing for the unembodied AIs being worried about the embodied ones, and this kind of never, in terms of what Shu Lea was saying, this never-ending chain of envy of what something else has, but you don't, whether that's longevity, a different body, a different gender, some kind of identity or embodiment that you crave. And this is the thing that really kind of preoccupies me, really. Is it that search for fulfillment, really, is just going to be perpetually receding, not just for humans worried about copying their homework, but also for AIs worrying about the next model at every, NVIDIA product launch every year. They're like, oh, no, what's the new medical robot going to be? And I feel that it's just a logical thing as a screenwriter would think, oh, that would be an obvious thing.
So I'm curious, are you suggesting that the AI itself could be envious?
That's exactly what I'm saying. So in the first film that I made about an AI, which is called Geomancer, and it's about an AI who's going to be decommissioned, an AI satellite, and they come down to Earth and want to be an artist. But then they find out that actually their parents don't love them, and they were just made in a startup factory 20 years ago by the Singapore government, as it happens, as part of their military-industrial complex, which is exactly what they would do. So it's not science fiction. I just think logically in that sense. And then I think, the company would just make a built-in therapist for their sad robots to stop them self-destructing, because that would just make economic sense. Just like in some companies, they have Friday massages, casual Thursdays, bring your kid into work, to make people feel better about doing their job that they're slightly dissatisfied about. So
that just brings up an interesting question. So back to the idea of the human, if AI can be envious, then in terms of what we think are attributes of humanness, would you then say the AI really has become human?
Maybe envy is jealousy. I don't know. But going back to Frankenstein, the monster is jealous about the humans having close friendships. You know, the envy is not of bodily ability or strength or intelligence. It's about community, in a sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't have a position on those things. I guess those are just myself imagining what it might be like in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no problem not taking AI as humankind. I think they are our comrades. I think they are our friends. I think they are our offspring. So I am in no fear of thinking AI will become human, having emotion, being jealous, envious, in love, and fucking, whichever way. So I think it's for me to treating technology as the way we progress ourselves, as the way we updating ourselves. I do want to say it was good that you introduced horse in the piece of work about cars, and you did have also a piece about car. I also have a piece about car in my recent exhibition, but I burned a car. I burned a car. Originally, I wanted to, I used some old car, like a junk car, in Korea at the Ulsan Museum at the exhibition before. But for the Haus der Kunst, they said they really liked that piece and want me to use a junk car again, and I didn't really have any car company to attack. Well, in Germany, well, yes, we have BMW, but it's too big for me. Anyway, so I ended up deciding to burn a car as a social comment, thinking about there's a lot of burned car in the Western society. But they got into a bit of trouble burning this car because it's illegal to burn a car in Germany. And of course, like, you know, Germany is famous for burning the car on New Year's Eve. Pretty much right after New Year's Eve, you see every street corner has a burn car. So here comes the burn car. It took a lot of work to burn this car. I got the fire department to work with me finally, so I got like 40 fire department in the name of practicing how to extinguish fire to join me to burn this car. Actually, by this time, I have wanted to put a burn car in a very different context. For me, it signifies protest and even can lead to revolution. So we actually, for this piece, I work with a sound artist, Martin House, and we actually trained. We built a little AI. We have a little database for the AI. We feed the AI all the revolution tests. And they took some research in terms of different language of revolution tests, different protests on the street. And we feed the AI all these tests, and then for the AI to re-utter these revolution slogans or just kind of chatting. So for me, before the AI, we actually have the big database, right? I think a few years ago, we will all be worried about the big database is taking over everything. So right now with AI, pretty much kind of all burst right after COVID. It's like during the COVID time, we have time to chew on these data, right? So right after COVID, all the people, the society is ready for AI. So AI took in all the data and chewed it out. Of course, in that process, it's a bit like stomach processing. So it actually got scrambled, got reassembled, and remoderated in any case. So, of course, it's going to get even more interesting for us. And I think, for me, I have been dealing with more about the kind of the race and gender algorithm in the AI application. And I talk about, I deal with the whole alignment of AI. If you actually, for the exhibition in Munich, I actually did a bit of research into all the guidelines or the rules about AI application. And we talk about ChatGPT or any image DALL-E or Midjourney. If you read their guideline, they actually have a very strict guideline about what image you are not supposed to generate or what kind of words you're not supposed to prompt AI. A lot of time, if you prompt AI ask, actually, it could say that this word doesn't exist. I do have a fear about the database that we are feeding the AI. So in the Munich exhibition, I actually teach AI to learn 77 dirty words, just so that we won't forget it. And this including ass, breast, well, vagina also, yeah. And anyway, why should vagina be a dirty word? So I guess my own resolution about this is to train your own AI. Even would be a small database. You just have to train them on your own. It's like, one day we will all have an AI pet.
Okay, so I'd like to open the discussion for quick questions. If any of you have it.
Hello, thank you so much for sharing. That was very inspiring. My name is Winnie, and I'm also very involved in the art industry, and I'm also an artist myself. And my previous background is also in tech as well. So I have one feedback, and I also have one question. So throughout the conversation, you guys are talking about AI is being a personal. So it is a personalness of. So, but we are the person who feeding them, who's teaching them. And let's say if we are a principal artists, like in the past, we use brushes instead of Photoshop. And we can feel the temperature, the room temperature, the acrylic, the oil, and we have some sort of a touching sense, just like a human interaction. But with AI arts or digital arts, so it seems like we are feeding them with emotion, but actually it is not, because it is computerized and produced by AI, even though we are feeding them. So that is a reflection of itself. And also my question is, do you think in the future, there's no need of human interaction? We can all have the joyfulness or happiness of enjoying an arts. And that will be just like a few years ago when we were all being locked down, we're being separated, but we're desperate for a connection. And now we have the time to connect, and we would like to push people away by using AI. Yeah, that's my question.
My feeling about that is the technologies that artists are using needs to be developed more. That's the work that needs to be done. And we're sort of at the level of, if you think of, when we're in kindergarten and you're just putting the crayon down on the paper, it's not expressive really, or that expressive yet. But much of the art I've seen that's using AI or using technologies is beginning to have a lot more sensibility than it did at the very beginning. And just if you look at the history of any of the analog media in any culture, you see an evolution in how that medium is being used and the level of expression that is reached. So just because, let's say, as an example, in Photoshop, I don't have quite the touch that I would have, let's say, using a brush. Actually, given the length of time I've used Photoshop, I actually do feel with the mouse a certain tactility in terms of how I use it on the screen. And the Photoshop is designed that it can respond to the amount of pressure I put on that mouse, so that there actually is a kind of haptic interaction going on. So if I put pressure on, the color gets more intense, like you're spilling something onto the paper. So I would argue that I think that there actually is a certain haptic physicality, embodied sense of the medium, and I think it's growing. I think that's what's interesting for artists who want to explore it. I think the work has to be done is how can you get sensibility, and that's why I think looking at the history of art is useful, because you see the level that was reached or has been reached, and using that as a kind of example of where you can possibly go with it. Now, you may fail, but if more and more people doing it, something will get through, and I think that's the challenge. What exactly the problem that you're proposing is the challenge.
Next question.
I don't expect an answer, but I'd be interested in your opinion. So yesterday I went to the museum summit, and there were museum directors talking about the use of AI in the buildings, in their presentation of exhibitions. And it was fascinating. There were two parts. We had museum directors, and then we had the producers, the software guys, the academics. And they showed all sorts of modelling of exhibitions and replication of artwork, which is digitally reproduced. And they did modelling, and they also talked about predictive AI, which I found fascinating. And my one thought when I was sitting there was what they were presenting can be easily used in warfare. And although I agree with Shirley not to talk about dystopia, but I'd be very interested in your ideas of where do we go, where do we stop something that potentially could be dangerous? So, for example, when drones first started, they were a fun thing akin to a balloon, and then photographers put a camera on them, and they were fun to take a photograph, and look at them now. So I'd be interested in your opinion, because you're artists, you're not designers of wall models. But where do we, if we were to go down a dystopian road, where do we actually say no more? And it's your opinion only. I know there's no hard and fast yes or no answer to this.
I can't really answer this question because I'm for self-destruction, so maybe Lawrence.
More balanced view. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because simulation, right? Military simulation, crowd control, fire escape drills, I'll just talk about video games, for example, because in video games, generally they have what's called weak AI. The enemies are intelligent, but they're not fully autonomous, living, breathing creatures with existential problems. They have behavior that make the game fun to play, and also are optimized so that they're very quick. If you look at a drone flight path, whether it's a wayfinding drone for traffic or bombing someone in Lebanon or Gaza or whatever, unfortunately, or fortunately from the company's point of view, it is a very similar pathfinding algorithm. And a pathfinding algorithm, which is what it's called in engineering, whether for self-driving cars or for military drones or for video game first-person shooters, it's pretty much the same algorithm. It's the A-star Dijkstra algorithm, which is made to optimize path. And that is a very morally ambivalent thing to use in different situations. So I guess what we are generally aware of as consumer technologies have generally been incubated and developed very often in black box, private, corporate, military sandboxes, like the internet or the AI or all of these things. And we're just seeing a very small sliver of what is commercially available. And I think your example of like, oh wow, consumer drones just popped up like 7 years ago, and people took aerial photos. No, there's aerial photography has been developed for over 100 years, from Zeppelins and so on, to take pictures of military targets and surveillance. So I think, unfortunately, what we're conscious of as consumers or as artists or as the general public is a very small sliver of what is being incubated and developed. And then, unfortunately, what happens is when we say, like, stop, no one listens to you, even less than 10 years ago. And also, what we're saying stop to is actually quite far down the food chain already. That's already what's commercially available. The stuff I feel that needs to be said no to, we're not even aware of. So I think there's that, I guess, the paradox of not knowing what is happening in a different sphere, because I guess we're distracted with what is $99 off the shelf and can be delivered by tomorrow. So I think the timescale involved is just something that it's hard to even comprehend the scale of that. So maybe. So
Go ahead. You want to say something?
It's okay. I just want to say, like, I was actually just thinking about this kind of sort of obsolete art genre called interactive art. Well, maybe not so obsolete, but because I was thinking about speaking of the technology was never in the black box, got developed because I think at the moment the user interactive is probably the biggest study, and the tracking, the whole technology of tracking, the way that we are being tracked, the way that the cookie and the tracking. So it is a very surveillance technology we are living, and so we have to promote interactive in a very different way. That's why I think the genre of interactive art should be abolished. Oh God, I speak so extremely.
Okay, was there another question?
I think, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. So myself is also a metaverse technology. I was been working on metaverse for the last few years, and I was thinking, because we were talking about the AI as a personality, and let's talk about that, because when we talk about the people who can use AI for mass production, or like for a lot of these kind of artwork with instant seconds with quality. And do you think that it will just open kind of like a different skill for this trajectory of the art history, or even the art market, for example, because it's just going to be commoditized, and it's just going to be just cheaper for the art to be produced, instead of just taking hours or just in an analog way. Now that we just actually have these kind of technologies to just digitalize that and make it just vastly available. And do you think, what is that the future trend for this going to be happening? So for the personality of AI? Yeah, thank you.
Anybody want to answer? Well, my initial reaction would be that I've experienced the question you're asking, just in terms of looking at what's going on and what's being produced by artists. And I can discern a difference. You can say you can reproduce it, and the AI can just produce what you... But if I see something, it doesn't necessarily have to be done by hand, but that has a certain quality, that's all I can say right now. It's different than just a copy of something. Or even if you, let's say, take Warhol, which is sort of the quintessential copy. I mean, he kind of made that a serious art, the idea of the copy. But there's something there in the time that it was done that has a different resonance than you're just saying, okay, I'm just going to do copying, and now I'm doing, like, art. I think we still remain, and that may change, in terms of our human perception, that we can distinguish to a certain level still this issue of sensibility. I don't really have the word for it. And maybe that's because this is new in a way. is the copy and the original or whatever. Yeah, that's my initial feeling about it.
I just want to. It's interesting because when the digital technology first get introduced, then you really cannot separate original and the copy. But in a kind of artist market, we still have to do that. So we do edition, you do artist proof, right? So you have still your origin copy. Then you start. However, of course, for me, because I believe the virus is the only salvation for humankind. So, I make a project called Virus Becoming, or I make a film called Yuki, which is the name of the virus. So, for me, the multiplication, replication is the most powerful tool. So same thing with any digital art or AI digital, whatever. I think in the end, it's like a bit more like a virus spread that's going to take over the world. But what can I say? Because I'm for self-destruction. So. I mean, it's kind of more like terminate, self-termination. Like, it could happen that way. But anyway, someone help me not to let me have the last word, please. It's really bad, Lawrence.
So, following on for that, I think it's very interesting because I think the fear comes from the limitation, the desire to be unique, to be special. Whether you're an artist like painting or sculpting or making a metaverse project, you want as an individual, I guess you want to stand out in a sense. But actually, from what Shu Lea was saying, actually, like the most natural thing for the virus to do, or the most natural thing for software to do, which is why software has, in a sense, overtaken hardware as the defining economic model for technology, is because of the ability to endlessly replicate at essentially no cost. And that also makes me think of, the Sino-futurism argument that actually maybe not only that's a good thing, but that's a necessary thing, because the desire to limit, the desire for originality and to have a kind of personal authorship of something is really part of a, I guess, like humanist paradigm for creativity that might be outdated by now. So, I don't know.
I would pose also another question. You can ask more, what does it do for you? Not whether it's a copy or not. Is that your experience of whatever it is, however it's produced, what is it doing to you? And to evaluate from that point. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.